Okay, I have some crudely drawn up plans of a lean-to shed that I want to build on the side of my existing shed as a place to put my lawnmower and a few things. So let me show you where I'm going to put it. Planning to put it right on the side here, so I can roll my lawnmower onto there and it'll have a roof to protect it from the rain. So I have some old wood that has been recaptured from an old shed, and I'm going to start cutting it up and putting it to use to the plants. So one of the first and most important things I want to do is set my baseboard. This is going to be the board that's actually attached to the shed and what the roof is going to be attached to. And I'm going to use these 2x4s to keep it up in place while I screw it into the studs of the shed. Now to find the studs, we can actually look at the nails that the siding is actually nailed into. If we just look at these nail placements, we can follow them up, and then we know the stud is right behind there. So that's where we're going to put our screws in. I pre-drilled holes into the actual baseboard, so now all I need to do is screw these screws in so it'll be attached to the shed. In my case, I put 5 screws in across 5 of the studs, and once that was in, I could remove the support boards because it was already screwed into the shed. Now that my main board is in place, I can begin to go to my other pieces of lumber, my other 2x4s, and start cutting them down to size based off of the plans that I drew up, so that when I put all these items together, it'll already be at the size that it needs to be. And you can see I just measure out the length that I need the board to be, and then mark it down, and I can make my cut. So what I'm cutting here is a 4x4, and my circular saw can't cut all the way through it, so I actually cut across the 4x4 several times to make the cut. So you're going to see me right now rotate the 4x4 over, so now I can cut on the other edge and get closer to making a cut all the way through. And I actually rotate and cut on all 4 sides to make the final cut. Now that my boards are cut to the right spot, I can begin marking where I want to put them together. So I'm just going down every 2 feet and marking where I want to attach another board to my top baseboard. And with my boards cut and marked, I can begin nailing them into place. But before we can erect any walls, we need to put a place to rest the walls. So I'm going to set a foundation. What I'm going to try to do is make a flat surface and then place these concrete blocks on top. Now once you got it looking like it's level, you got to make sure it actually is level. So go ahead and pull out a level and place it down, and you can see I need a little bit of adjustment here, and if I look the other way, I need some adjustment here as well. And there really is no secret if it's not level. Just keep on working on the ground area to make sure it gets level. Once my base stones are level and flat alone, and then they're flat and level across all of them with my baseboard down, we can take the first steps of adding the wall, which is adding the board which is going to be actually attached to the shed. And this is up against a stud. And once I have this part secured, we can attach the rest of the items to the first base floor. And there we go, we have one wall down. And as you can see, that first wall is very basic. We have the one board that is attached to the shed itself, a board going across, and a couple more that are attached to the baseboard. The baseboard and the board attached to the shed were already in place, so to get this wall set up, all I had to do was to add the others which were already framed. So just like the first wall, we have a baseboard that's already in place, and then we have the wall framed that we already put together earlier, and we're just going to drop it down on top of the baseboard. And then once we have it roughly in place in a stable position, we can begin to set it and screw it into place. So I went ahead and added just a couple more boards, another one that's attached to the shed up front, one across the bottom, and one in the back attached to the starter board. And once we got everything framed up, we can start to think about our siding. What I'm doing right here is I'm just putting a few placeholder nails in a few spots, so I'll have a place where I can take a piece of siding and just drop it down on top of it. You can see the nails stick out just a little bit, so there's a place where I can drop the siding on, and it's right at the height that I want the siding to start. And once these are in place, we can take a wood siding piece, drop it down, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off where it meets the top of my frame, and I'm just going to draw a line across the top because that's where I'm going to cut it so it matches up flush to the top of the frame. I found that it was easier to cut with the siding piece already down on the ground, or at least close to the ground. Put a couple of boards underneath it. Otherwise, you can get an effect where if you do it on a table, if your table's not long enough, your siding piece might be long enough where it starts to bend as you're cutting it, and that just makes things tough. Once our siding piece is cut, we can rest it on the nails and then lock it into place by screwing it in real good. With our first piece of siding locked into place, we can do the same thing with the second. Place it down, and then mark where it needs to be cut, and then cut it down to size. And once we've locked in the second piece of siding in place, we can think about the back. So we can measure out how long we need to make that piece, and then cut it down to size. And to save money, I'll just use the tops of the siding pieces we cut off to use for the back side once I cut it down to the right width, and then use both the tops on top of each other to be my back piece. Once we lay down our first siding piece, we're going to put down a caulk and flashing layer between the two siding pieces. In addition to putting a layer of caulk underneath the flashing, like I already did, we're also going to put a layer on top of it like I'm doing now. While the caulk is still wet, we're going to want to put the second piece of siding right on top of the first, and then lock it in place to finish our siding pieces. And once I have the siding in place, I'm also going to put a flashing piece on the top here as well. With the siding done around the sides, I now want to think about building a door for the front. So I'm going to measure out the entryway distance, and then maybe leave a little bit of space on each side to make it a smooth operating door. My door is going to be a combination of 2x4s and 1x6s. So once I have all of those cut out into the right size, I can begin to nail down the door frame, 2x4s, to the door panels, the 1x6s. Then I added one more 2x4 right down the middle for added stability. And with that built, we can put it off to the side for now. What I'm doing now is I'm priming and painting some of these wood pieces that I'm later going to cut down and use as trim to help weatherproof it. I'm also going to go ahead and prime and paint the roof board, even though it's not necessary with the shingles on top of it. Once the primer has dried, you can go ahead and apply your paint. I'm painting it white so it's hard to notice the difference between the primer and the paint. And I'm also going ahead, like I said before, and painting the roof board. I'm using a cheap roofing paper instead of felt paper, so hopefully the paint will help make up for some of that. The next thing I'm going to take a look at is the roofing rafters. While it's resting on top of the frame and the starter board, I can mark down the angle that I need to cut it off at so it'll touch flush to the shed. So I can now go ahead and cut this board at that angle
Now when I prop this board up, it'll be leaning flush against the siding here. And I can mark off where I need to cut this board so it'll sit perfectly on top of the frame and the starter board. Because of the sharp angles involved, I'm only going to be able to use the circular saw for parts of the cut. I'm not going to cut all the way. I'm also going to have to push it off with some hand tools. You might not be able to get a perfect cut, so you might need to whittle it and sand it down to get it nice and smooth. Once our first rafter is set, we can measure the angle that we need to cut the front so it's at the same angle as the back. And now that we've got our first rafter perfect, we can lay this board over top of our other rafter boards and mark where we're going to make the cuts on those boards as well. And then we can begin the same process with the other rafter boards, cutting them down. Before we permanently attach our rafter boards to the frame and the starter board, we're going to use a clamp to push it down exactly in the spot that we want. Before permanently placing your rafters, it might be a good time now to paint the siding of the shed the color that you want it. And I'm also going to paint right over this flashing piece as well, the same color that I'm doing the rest of my shed. Painting now will allow you to move the rafters out of the way if they're getting in the way of your painting. With the painting done, I'm now going to go ahead and permanently attach my rafters. And once you got one in, you just continue the same steps for the other rafters. And once we got all the rafters in place, we can begin to think about attaching the roof board. Now the roof board right now is a perfect rectangle, but if we look at the corner of the shed, we can see that there is some trim on the shed that will interfere with the roof board sitting flush against the shed wall. So I'm just going to measure how much of it is going to be blocked off, so then I can go back to the roof board and cut that corner out so it'll fit flush against the wall. After we have the corner cut out, we can go ahead and place our roof board on top of the rafters. Once we have the roof board where we want it, we can clamp it down, and after it's clamped down, we can think about nailing it in place. Now what I'm doing is I'm clamping down the fascia trim board that we painted earlier, so it'll be easy to attach. Once we've nailed in our fascia board by putting nails right where the rafters are behind it, we can think about adding a drip edge over top. The drip edge is just a piece of metal that hangs over the roof that prevents water from getting in between some of the cracks. You're going to want the drip edge to wrap around on both sides of that roof fascia, so I'm just trimming it down with a pair of scissors so it'll have a nice angle in it. Once we've placed it where we want, we can start to nail it in. So I'm going to take a moment here to cut down some of my trim pieces and add the trim to the side of the shed. Now I already primed and painted it, so it just needs to be cut. Once it's cut down, I can put it into place and nail it in where I want it. Now I don't have any felt paper, so I'm using this red rosin paper that I have. I'm just rolling it across the roof and then tacking it in place with this staple gun. Once I reach the end, I can just cut it off and set up again. You can see I'm going to need 2 passes to fully cover the roof, so here's pass number 2. And now I can tack down my second layer. Now even though I'm not using true felt paper, the fact that I primed and painted my roof board should be good enough to act as a water barrier. Once we have tacked down everything, we can cut off the excess and get pretty close to the edge here. If it's not perfect, don't worry, because we're about to cover that up with another piece of flashing drip edge along the sides here that should cover it up. And we'll add a piece to both sides. With the paper and the drip edge down, we can now think about the actual roofing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the shingles of the shingle row so we just have the tar area, the dark spot. And this is going to be our starter strip. We're going to place our first starter strip without the actual shingles on it on the first row of the roof, and we're going to leave it sticking out 3/8 of an inch across the board here. Once we got it lined up, we can nail it in place. Once we've added a starter row all the way across our roof, we can lay down our first row of shingles. We just want it to overlap the first row exactly with the starter strip. And then we can nail it in place by placing a nail right below that black tar strip. The last piece on your first row most likely is going to overhang a bit. Once you have it nailed into place, go ahead and cut off the excess, but you're going to want to leave a little bit of overhang. Be sure to keep the extra piece. It may come in handy later. On your second row of shingles, you're going to offset, placing the first one down 6 inches. That way the gaps of the two shingles on top of each other don't line up exactly. Then you're going to push down the shingle so it lines up with the start of the first one. A good way to reuse the excess that you cut off from the first row is to use it as the last strip for the second row, since it'll probably overhang and you'll have to cut this down anyway. Once we work our way up to the top, you may notice that the shingle rows don't fit up flushly against the wall, and that's okay. We can cut it down later. So go ahead and nail in these pieces and we'll cut it down after. Before we clean up the top row, we need to make sure we get all the way up to the top row, which means filling in the offsets. So now we're going to add a row of shingles to all the places that we offset to fill in everything. Once we have everything filled in all the way up to the top, we can cut off our excess by just taking a blade and going across right where the roof board meets the wall and just cutting all the way across. Once we're flush all the way across, we can add a specially cut row of just the shingles across the top to finish it up. Once we have our top row completely done, we can finish off the job by placing a metal flashing piece across the top. We're going to want to cut it down to size and then make any adjustments on the edges that we need to. Across the top, I'm adding a layer of clear silicone caulk to make a watertight seal. And now I'm going to go ahead and, after the silicone dries, I'm going to paint over both the silicone and the flashing. Notice that at the bottom of my flashing, I have some spare shingles pieces. This is going to help protect the actual roofing. Once that's all done and dry, we can pull away those spare roofing pieces to reveal the finished product of the roof. Now we want to get back to our door where we can add our hinge hardware pieces. We're going to want to place them at a distance where the hinges are still going to have room to swing open and closed. Once we've set our location, we can drill our holes and bolt it in. With our hardware set on our door, we can now come to the shed and decide how high up we want the door to be, and then place the door. After I got the door placed where I wanted it, I clamped it into place and then added some wood shims to make sure there was some space for the hinges to swing openly. With the door placed where we want it, we can drill in the holes for the bolts and then bolt it into place. Same thing for the bottom hinge. Once our door is fully bolted in by the hinges, we can remove our clamps and the shims and the boards that it's resting on. Now we can start thinking about a closing latch. As you see here, the hardware piece for my closing latch won't fit on the 2x4 alone, so I'm going to have to add a little piece of wood to the side here to make it easier to close. And now the latch hardware will fit on with ease. So now I can just screw it in place, and the corresponding piece that's attached to the door will swing right over. Before I'm completely done, I'm going to touch up some areas of the trim. And then I'm going to use some of the spare wood that I cut out of the rafter boards and some extra pieces of siding to make ramps so I can easily push my lawnmower in and out of the lean-to shed. Once I created 2 ramps with some spare pieces of material, I'll give them a quick coat of paint just for some weather protection, let them dry, and then nail them into place. And now I'm set to use it.